everyone. How's it going? I'm happy to be here. Glad that you guys can join us today. I am Kelly Sutter. I am one of the expedition guides and soon to be expedition leader with Uncruise Adventures, and I love it. I've been with Uncruise for a while now, almost 5 to 6 seasons. Look forward to hopefully going back up to Alaska and exploring Alaska with you guys when we get back and start running again. But I originally am from Miami Beach, Florida, so enjoying the nice, very hot weather. But I did study up in Alaska. I got my degree in outdoor studies and environmental science, and I love it. I then found Uncruise and started guiding there. But I was a kayak guide before that, and also just studied a lot of how to be a guide, really. So I didn't focus on otters in college. I fell in love with them at Uncruise, and I know you guys will too. But we're gonna go ahead and get started, and I hope you enjoy. This is definitely I want to say an interactive presentation. All the photos that are in the presentation I did take with Uncruise. I did have a telephoto lens, so it's not iPhone, but definitely you get to get these close-up views of these small otters and pinnipeds. So let's go ahead and get started. Perfect. All right. So, are you glad to talk about pinnipeds? So you're probably also thinking, oh, what is a pinniped? Pinnipeds are basically means fins 4 feet. So it's our seals and sea lions. And I'll admit, come on, these guys are absolutely adorable. And I just fell in love with them because you never expect to see them. You're always surprised, and then they have big eyes and you just fall in love with them, and they're so photogenic is the best way to put it. And I also work the Mexico itinerary, the Baja itinerary, and I had something happen to me that then made me very obsessed with pinnipeds, but I basically had this happen. So I know it's funny, but I had so one of the things that we do in Baja is we actually swim with the Steller sea lions. Now, it's just the juveniles that end up having interactions with you, and this is a very juvenile Steller sea lion, or I'm sorry, California sea lion, and he just decided to hitch a ride on my back and start chewing on my snorkel as a play toy, and I could not get this guy off of me, and I loved every minute of it. So I was able to get a fun selfie, and yes, this has been my profile for about like 3 years now, but I love it. You can't take away those experiences. Now, I'm definitely not saying that if you go to Baja, you are going to have this experience, but it is a really fun opportunity to see these amazing creatures in the water, and you'll become just obsessed with them as I am. So, but before we go on to pinnipeds, I'm going to basically I'm going to talk about otters too. Even though they're not in the same family, I decided to basically talk about both otters and pinnipeds just because they're so cute, and this is what you would see while kayaking or on a small boat skiff tour, and you can find them somewhat in the same area. But we're going to talk just general about these guys and learn why they're so amazing and what to look for and how to find them out there. So going on to sea otters, cute, amazing picture of sea otter eating a massive crab. But sea otters are pretty common to find near Glacier Bay and in Glacier Bay. The farther south you go, They're a little harder to find, but if you do one of our Glacier Bay itineraries, you're pretty much guaranteed to see a sea otter. And these guys really don't mind, sometimes don't really mind us viewing them because they're so preoccupied by grooming or feeding. I just love just watching them do their thing. But this is their range. So they're in most of southern Alaska. And you can see that they're not on land, it's all on the water. So very big range on that part of Alaska. So as I said, they are not pinnipeds. Otters are part of the weasel family, and they are 5 feet in length. And that's very big. I'm only 5'7", so I'm just a bit taller than a sea otter, but they're a lot larger than people anticipate. Also, the Alaska sea otter is a little bit different than the ones you see in Monterey or California. These Alaskans are a little bit bigger, but they actually all come from the same 400 and then got transported. So they're only difference is that size is just a bit bigger. Now, the lifespan is about 20 years. I'll talk more about the diet, but invertebrates and fish are their main part of their diet. And their main predators are mostly humans and orcas, but it's not orcas don't love to eat otters, but definitely will have them as a snack if they need them. Their reproduction, they have about 1 pup per year. And why is that? Well, they could only fit 1 pup on their belly when growing up. So so whenever we're out exploring and looking for sea otters and you see a raft of sea otters, that's what a group of sea otters is called, you look for, I always tell people, like, look for a big fluff ball on top of another sea otter, because it's likely to be an adorable baby sea otter. And this guy we found near the Indians, and he was just playing around on top of mom's belly, having a grand old time. And there's actually usually multiple babies in one raft, so always look out for that. Now, the one thing is that otters actually don't have a season of reproduction or to have their babies like other animals like other animals that we know of. They will have pups all year round, but if the baby is born during the winter time, it's less likely to make it. So just from harsh conditions and harder to find food. So this guy was definitely 2 months old in peak summer, so he was going to be a fat, healthy baby that was going to do well in life. I definitely see that. So sea otters, they are incredibly flexible and can move around and can be very acrobatic. Now, they also have a very high metabolism. They actually have to eat around 25% of their body weight a day. So, and generally an adult sea otter is around 100 pounds. So they have to eat 25 pounds of food a day. And that's just to sustain their weight. So that is just amazing. But with eating all of that, they don't actually have a lot of body fat. They have very little. Females, when nursing, will produce more fat to be able to feed the baby, but overall, they don't actually have much body fat at all. They have their fur to keep them warm. Now, with that, the sea otters have the world's densest fur in the animal kingdom, which is incredible. 1 million hairs per square inch. Now, I feel really bad for whatever intern had to count the million hairs per square inch, but thank gosh he did, so figured out that this is definitely the densest. And you could just tell by touching it. It is also the softest fur. If you ever go to a national park visitor center, or when our boats go up into Glacier Bay, the sea otter pelt, the park ranger will bring out a square sea otter pelt. And if you're feeling all the pelts, you can definitely tell that sea otter pelt is the softest and is going to be the warmest. Their skin actually stays dry because that fur is so dense. Now, their skin is actually very stretchy too. And with being very stretchy and I would say kind of a lot of it, they can actually groom every inch of their body. So they can take their paw, go behind their back and their lower back and stretch that skin all the way to their mouth to pretty much be able to groom every single part, because they need to keep that fur very clean to stay warm. They don't want it to seep through. One of the things that they also do is they aerate their fur. Whenever you're just watching them groom or just eating or something, you might see a sea otter just do a random turn, and that's strictly because they need to keep that fur aerated. The picture that is shown here is an otter aerating its fur, and why he looks so funny is because he has the feet and the hands and the head out of the water. That's actually where basically the skin isn't as stretchy and it's not as warm. So they actually keep their feet, hands, and head out of the water just for warmth. So a lot of the times when you're seeing a sea otter, this is what you're going to see. And that's how guides are able to tell, is it a sea otter? Is it a harbor seal? From a distance, if they look to see if they could see the feet. So if you see almost two dots next to each other in the distance, it's likely to be a sea otter. If it's just one dot, it might be a harbor seal. So I revealed the secret of what makes, guides so impressive to figure out what animal is so far away. Now, a little bit more on their diet. So the sea urchins, these guys, they love sea urchins. It's the creme de la creme, like the best thing that they can get. Sea otters also technically have the most expensive diet, and that's strictly because they like everything that we like that's very high end, aka crabs, sea urchins, abalone, and that actually ended up getting a lot of fishermen very mad because the sea otters were eating those very, I'd say, their profit. So if you ever talk to a fisherman about sea otters, they're generally not going to like them. But why sea urchins are it's so important is sea urchins, their favorite food is the holdfast of kelp. That's basically the thing that holds the kelp to the bottom, and they actually don't eat a lot of the kelp. They're just eating that one really important piece of that kelp that will basically wipe the kelp out. So it's very important that there's not a lot of sea urchins. So getting on to the food web that we have. So here is a very balanced food web. You've got the sea otter on top, and then you have larger fish, crabs, sea stars, sea urchins. You can see that. And then you go down the food web and you can see that the sea urchins are eating the seaweed and eating the kelp. And if you end up, all of this is very balanced, but if you end up taking away the sea otters, you can see this whole ecosystem just crashes. So you can see the sea urchin population goes up 4 times, and then they eat a lot of the kelp, and the kelp is what is basically is what holds this environment together. It is very important that everything else starts to disappear. Now, why do we know this happens is because it's actually happened. The sea otters have disappeared in areas. So sea otters are that keystone species. And if you've heard that phrase before, you probably have. It's the same thing as wolves in Yellowstone. So if you take away a keystone species, the whole environment will change. So a little bit on that. Now I can do a whole presentation on the history of sea otters, so I'm just going to do a very, very quick version of this. So very summarizing. So when Russia came over and was exploring Alaska and claiming the land, they basically never really went on the land too much because it was way too harsh. And they found the native Alaskans, and it was a cold, harsh environment that they saw that the native Alaskans had sea otter pelts and were using that as clothing and using a lot of things, and realizing, oh my gosh, this sea otter pelt is the softest and warmest thing out there. I must have it. And they did a lot of trading, and Russia ended up enslaving a lot of the Alaskan natives for these pelts, and basically hunted them to near extinction. There was a time period that a sea otter pelt was worth 1 pound of gold. That's insane! 1 pound of gold for a sea otter pelt. So it was very valuable, a lot of money to make. Now, bunch of time goes by, and there's basically no sea otters that they can find. And Russia was going into a war, and they needed some money, so they ended up selling Alaska, and then that's the Seward folly. No one thought that was a good idea to buy Alaska, but U.S. bought Alaska for $7.2 million and ended up 2 cents per acre, and making a bit of money because of the gold rush. So good choice. But what ends up happening was the U.S. they almost thought it was extinct, but were still hunting them if they could find them, because it was still a valuable animal to have, a valuable pelt to have. But they didn't become protected till much later, and they were protected and listed as an endangered species a lot later. And once there was basically the Endangered Species Act, and they realized that there was only about 400 left, 400 to 1,000 sea otters left on that Aleutian chain, that little chain of islands out here. There was basically a raft, and not a lot of people lived out here, so they weren't found, and thank gosh they weren't, because all of our sea otter populations stem down to those 400 to about 1,000. So when everybody thought they were extinct, their population started to increase and started to look better, started to expand, and they were a protected species for a long period of time. And then there's some other challenges they run into, like the Exxon Valdez oil spill. That was a area that's north of Southeast Alaska that did decimate the otter population that was living in that area, because the oil got on their fur and they couldn't clean it off, so that a lot of them ended up dying. The Exxon Valdez happened in 1989 and took a long time to recover. You can still go to Valdez, Alaska, and that area, and dig down and find a layer of oil this many years later. There are still some species that are not fully recovered. Now, this is a dated chart, but you could see 2014 is when it kind of stops. But it's a good representation of how long it took for things to recover. I mean, it happened in 1989. In 1992, barnacles started to recover and rocky intertidal life. And then skipping on, you don't see the sea otter population start to recover in that area until 2013, many years later. And as I said, still species today are not fully recovered in that area. So it incidents are devastating to an area. You can't just get rid of it and make it go away. But we're happy to see that the sea otter population is recovered in that area. But on the bright side, the population is on the rise. They are doing so much better. They are actually hitting max capacity in certain areas, like Glacier Bay. They just came out with a study showing that the sea otters in Glacier Bay National Park have reached max capacity, which does mean that they might move on, or it's gonna fluctuate. So I'm hoping to see them a little farther south in Ketchikan. They're technically there. I just, as a person that works on a boat that, there, I don't see them that often. And I can definitely tell when kayaking in that area, I could see a lot more sea urchins. So this just means that they're going to have to head south. Relocations with sea otters are actually they're successful yet not successful. If it's too close of an area, they'll just swim back or they'll get stressed out. They kind of like their area. I consider sea otters kind of being like our cats of the sea. They mostly just sleep, eat, and groom themselves, and they also like their territories. So they have to kind of move on their own by realizing there's not as much food. But they're doing it on their own and very successfully. So I'm really excited that they are doing much better. I don't even have an accurate number because it is fluctuating and on the rise so much. So I can't even give you a number of what the population is. So yeah, but that is our sea otters. So that's our sea otters. We're going to go ahead and go on to our river otters. Not going to talk about these too much because we actually really don't see them that much in Alaska. You got to be lucky. It's maybe once every 3 weeks, but very rare to see these guys. But river otters are in Alaska, and notice that their range is very different. They like to be on land versus on the water. They do hunt on the water, but they don't sleep, mate and have their babies on the water like sea otters. With that, I didn't say it, but sea otters spend their entire lives out at sea. They're the only weasel basically the only mammal in the weasel family that is a marine mammal. So that's crazy. So the river otters can live basically spend most of their time on land and only hunt in the water. So they can get pretty big too if they have the food. So they can actually get up to 5 feet. Their tail is longer, so they're just generally not as big. So if you compare them, sea otters generally are a lot larger, even though they can reach up to 5 feet in length. But that's, as I said, pretty rare. Now, their lifespans over 20 years. They have a bit more diverse diet and eating invertebrates, frogs, fish, mammals, and vegetation matter. Anything along the river and anything they can really get their paws on. The biggest predators are humans. You could put bears in there, but bears generally are pretty lazy. And if they, it's pretty rare. And also their population can go up a lot faster than the sea otters since they can only have one pup. Basically river otters can have up to 1 to 6 pups a year. So their population did go down also. They did get hunted because of their fur. Definitely not as dense, but definitely soft and warm, but their population bounced up pretty fast. So seals and sea lions. Now, so getting into our pinnipeds. Remember, fins 4 feet. There is a difference between seals and sea lions. So if you ever get a guide saying it's not a sea lion, it's a seal, it's, there is a difference. So, you know, maybe write this down if you want to win a trivia night in any of our boats. I feel like there's always a question. So the differences between seals and sea lions, easiest way, number one, is their ears. So seals don't have external ear flaps, it's just holes, while, as you can see, the sea lions have a little bit of an external ear flap. Easy. Now, there are other things like how they move, very important. So underwater, so they basically move themselves on land and in the water, exact opposite. So bear with me, but basically sea lions will use their fore flippers, so they're basically these flippers, and move themselves forward just by like that, and will steer with their hind flippers. Well, it's exact opposite for seals. And sea lions can actually rotate their hips forward and walk on land, while seals do something that's pretty funny that's called fasciculation. Very weird, funny word for basically wiggle on land. They fasciculate on land. So really funny word for wiggling on land. But with that, seals actually will, they're not very confident on land as much as sea lions. Now, there is the elephant seal. There are exceptions to being like what I mean by confident and stuff like that. But specifically the harbor seal versus the Steller sea lion or California sea lion, they're very different. And it's strictly because sea lions can almost pretty much run and climb, while seals have to just wiggle, so they don't get as high and they don't feel as safe on land as sea lions do. So how they act is pretty different too, and that's species dependent. But so let's go into these species. So species that we'll likely see on our trips is the harbor seal. Now, I think these guys are definitely one of my favorite animals to see while kayaking, because you don't see them coming. Why? Is because they're very quiet. Now, seals, how they move in the water is very different than those sea lions. As I said, they can do something called periscoping. Now, that just basically means they take their head and poke it up out of the water very quietly and look at you. They're very curious. Now, seals and sea lions are kind of like our puppy dogs of the sea. They kind of look like dogs, don't they? Actually, they aren't technically part of the bear family. I'm wearing my Ray Trolls t-shirt about the family, the bear family tree. Dogs, bears, and sea lions and harbor seals and pinnipeds are all in the same overall family. So these guys are definitely our dogs of the seas. They're very, you can see their expressions. I love it. Now, when you're kayaking, oh, well, let me mention this first. But yeah, here's their range. It's pretty much the same as sea otters. But while you're kayaking, what you want to look for is that head popping up out of the water. And sometimes they sunbathe. Sometimes you'll just see them soaking up the rays and taking a little nap, especially during high tide when their, I'd say, haul out zone is covered sometimes. So, but these guys love to investigate you, and they're way more confident in the water, so they'll sneak up on you. So a lot of the times the guides end up seeing the harbor seals way more than the guests, because the guests are so focused on kayaking, and the guide turns around and looks at the guests to do a count, and there's like, 10 harbor seals right behind them looking at them, and I'm like, hey guys, and you don't want to point, because pointing is almost scary to them and they'll just disappear. So you just kind of have to like slow, like, hey guys, there's a harbor seal right behind you. Don't point. Don't. And I have to tell people, do not point. Don't. That's one of my rules while kayaking. Don't point at a harbor seal, because then it's gone, because it knows you are looking at them. It'll just disappear. So it's just part of the game. I love it. Sometimes they're very camouflaged, and they do haul out on rocks. and where they're born can sometimes change the coloration of that of the harbor seal. So they don't not always that light color. They can be that dark color. They are quite big. They can get up to 6 feet in length. Females not as big. They can weigh up to, males can weigh up to 330 pounds. Very different than our sea otter. So they use their blubber to keep them warm than their fur. They can live also up to 20 years. Their diet is mostly fish and squid. Now I have tried to see them eat some intertidal zone too, but they're easier to catch octopus and fish. So their predators are human orcas, polar bears, and Steller sea lions if they're young. Why? And now this one's where it's actually pretty, I'd say, funny, but their nickname over the radio and according to sea fishermen and some guides is called orca sausages. I didn't give them that nickname, but they are the transient orca's favorite meal. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. But they have only one pup annually. They are one of the species that will have their a season when they are mating and pupping. So reproduction, they become sexually mature around 3 to 5. Males a little older, gestation length 10.5 months with a 2.5 month delayed implantation. Very common for animals to have delayed implantations, especially in the pinniped family. Their lactation is only a month, and they're pupping, as I said, pupping yearly. And they do have a specific breeding season of late summer to fall, and their pupping season is May to July. And why that is so important is because they basically need to protect the babies. So with that reproduction, females do give birth on land and on ice. You can even see in this photo, this baby is brand spanking new, not a lot of fat on, and if you look really close, you can actually see the umbilical cord still attached. I didn't notice that until I was editing it, and I was freaking out. So with that, the moms are very, skittish, and they actually, one of the dangers is if you scare a mom with a baby who isn't strong enough to withstand that cold temperatures, they might abandon the baby. And that's their biggest risk. But why do they give birth on ice is strictly because orcas, actually, remember, everything that harbor seals do is because of transient orcas, their main predator. So they give birth on that ice because orcas try to do echolocation and get thrown off by icebergs, or like bergy bits, not icebergs, but bergy bits in the water, that it's harder to see them. While these, the harbor seal actually has what I'd say my sense of an echolocation. It's not echolocation, but they have hypersensitive whiskers that they can pretty much be blind and just see with their whiskers. So there is completely successful blind harbor seals that do not see an effect of that. So that that's truly amazing. So that is why they're out there, just to save themselves with the orcas. So these are amazing daddies. Getting a little bit more into this orca details. This is kind of what I talk about, what you might see when you're kayaking. Just that coconut. That is all you're going to see if they're in the water and looking at you. It's just a little coconut in the water. And if they go down, they can hold their breath average 3 to 7 minutes. But that's not the max. They can dive up to 1,500 feet in the water. 1,500 feet. That's just amazing. And they can be underwater for over 30 minutes. Just take a dramatic pause there. Holy moly, for such a tiny, I'd say, marine mammal to be able to do that is incredible. Now, why they do that is to get away from the transient orcas. Sometimes when they cannot get away via ice, or if they can't get away on land or anything like that, they'll dive. They'll dive that deep and to get away from the orcas. So they actually store oxygen in their muscles to withstand the pressure, and they have a greater volume of blood. Oh my gosh. And basically they slow down their heart rate to 4 to 6 minutes per minute, which is clinically dead. So they go into a hibernation state to not to preserve oxygen, and just basically they go down there and just hold it out and until they need to breathe and come back up. But that's insane. 4 to 6 minutes, clinically dead in our book. It's amazing that they have adapted that way to get away from the orcas, because the orcas cannot hold their breath there that long, and they cannot dive that deep. So just mind-blowing. So whenever you're out on a kayak and you're out there and one goes down, I told people, do not hold your breath, because they sure can, because they will definitely, they might not come back because they can easily hold it much longer. All right, so a little bit more on this population. So their population is currently around 205,000, but they're in danger, you know, they're not doing great. I mean, they're not doing bad, but they're not doing great. So, but overall, their biggest problems are pollutants, oil spills, overfishing, and entanglement. And kind of as I mentioned before, the decline in population in glacial fjords due to disturbance. So that's kind of what I was saying with, oh, you know, you don't want to scare a mom during that pupping season. Even in Glacier Bay, they shut down their, they shut down certain areas in the park for pupping season for harbor seals. So more of them can survive. So we need to respect that. A lot of the times, this is definitely a species that when we see out there and we see them on land, we keep our distance. We do not want to get that close because they are very skittish, and you do not want to disturb an animal and change its behavior because of you. That's, you know, it's rude. If everyone did it, they would just move on and never be there. So definitely with harbor seals, if they're on land and I get my binocs, we're not going to get a good view because they're on land. If they come up to us in the water because they're investigating, great. But if they're on land, you have to listen to the guide and say, all right, we're going to avoid that area because they're on the rocks and we don't want to mess, we don't want to scare them. But they're doing, as I said, they're doing better because we're blocking off and becoming more educated. So now getting on to the Steller sea lions. So these big guys, I wouldn't say they're that cute as the last, you know, 3 animals we talked about, but they're still amazing creatures to find out there. Yes, they are very big. They can get, males can get up to 11 feet, which is massive. Females are only 8 feet. So there is a very big difference between males and females. They also have what we call sexual dimorphism, which basically means you can tell the difference between females and males. I'm going to go to the last slide. So I want you to look. It's like I keep pointing at the screen because I think I have a laser. But look at the big male, basically the largest one in the bunch. There's one male and a bunch of females. If you look at that male, you can see he has a big fat forehead. He has a forehead. His head shape is different, and they have something called a mane, which basically is their chest. Sea lion, mane. I love it when things make sense. And the female's a lot smaller, sleeker face. So always important to kind of realize what, who are you seeing? Are you seeing a big male or are you seeing a female? Because males are a lot more aggressive than the females, but I'll get into that. Their lifespans, males only live to be about 20, females can live longer. Their diet, very wide range, from octopus and fish, from whatever they can get their hands on, even some deep water fish. Their predators, mostly humans. Yes, orca can be in line on that, but a little harder to catch, a little bigger, and they can just hop on land, so not as not a big change in their behavior because of that. And they have about one pup per year, and they also have that breeding seasons. So a little on their breeding seasons. So they are specific to rookeries and haul out zones. The difference between rookeries and haul out zones is rookeries are where there is pupping happening, so where they're breeding and pupping and are having babies, while haul out zones are just an area to sleep, just an out, but there's no territories happening there. So, and the crazy thing is that they're born in the same, basically born in the same rookery that they'll go back and reproduce the same rookery they're born in. So they're actually very easy to study because you can actually find and determine the population just by observing rookery sites. Males, big males, are big, very territorial, and they will defend the rookery site. So defending off any other males for the best spot on that rock. That is my rock. This is get out of here. All right, and he has a harem of females. Females do give birth and then will mate 2 weeks later. So there's technically only 2 weeks out of the entire year they're not pregnant. Woo! Goodness, that's terrible. That's awful. Sorry, females. But they also do have a delayed implantation, and if they're not healthy enough, the baby won't take. The sexual maturity is around 3 to 8 years for females, but males is 9+ years. And that's strictly because they need to be the biggest male they can be to ward off any other males. Like you can see in this photo, a big male calling out, being nice and loud. They do a very low like sound. So they don't bark like California sea lions. They make a gurgle sound, really. And they do have their breeding season from late spring to early summer, and pupping season from May to July. But since they are not, as I said, as timid on land, they will just they're not as scared, or they don't block off territories from them. But you're not allowed to walk on a rookery, period. So. But the population for them, the eastern stock is around 60,000. Western stock is 50,000, and the western stock is listed on the Endangered Species Act, and unfortunately has been in a decline over the last 30 years. So showing you a map of the separation between the eastern and western, we do see the western or the eastern population, but they actually can migrate, and if they're not breeding, they might not go to the rookery site, but they will basically can do a massive migration and intermingle, but they will never actually, they have to go back to their original rookery site. But in 1990, the Steller sea lion was listed as threatened. Basically in 1997, the western was listed as a endangered species, and the eastern was remained threatened. And still today, the eastern was delisted, so from the Endangered Species Act, but remains as a depleted status. So they're still close monitoring. They're still monitoring because the population technically isn't doing great, but it's not an endangered species. So all these weird politics into it, but they're very easy to monitoring, and they're still doing a lot of studies today on these guys. Now, going into the rest of my presentation is a little graphic on photos, and I got a lot of these photos from shared from a NOAA presentation about awareness. So I got permission to use these slides and to show what's happening to our pinnipeds here in Alaska. So take the lead and do not feed. What's happening is fishermen are feeding these Steller sea lions and they're getting habituated. So why do we have a problem? People are deliberately feeding these sea lions for entertainment and for tourism. And people just throw carcasses out in a particular area, and these animals are getting dependent on these animals. So then it will lead to aggression. I mean, you've probably heard, do not feed wild animals because of yada yada, you know, all these reasons. This is definitely a perfect example. You can think of a wild animal back in your home state, and like it's always do not feed him because he will get used to it and then not be able to survive. Same thing here, but these guys fight back. So kind of as I said, that habituation will lead to aggression. So these guys are now, once the fishermen like, well, stop eating my bait, get away from me, they're gonna fight back. They'll actually get on boats, they will pull people into water. There was that viral video. But the viral video of a sea lion taking a kid into the water, but they edited out the dad feeding the sea lion. Like, it's crazy. So you definitely don't want to do that. And then fishermen end up shooting the Steller sea lions, or they end up getting entangled because they're in areas where there's more pollutants and entanglement issues. They're also getting, unfortunately, stuck in salmon flashers. So they're, in these photos, you can see all those are salmon flashers. So eating salmon gear, ingesting it, and then getting these basically getting entangled, and also hooks in their mouths, and then can't feed. So with entanglement and ingestions and flashers, there is ways to disentangle it. So basically NOAA or other programs, NOAA, the National Oceanographic research here in the US, will basically tranquilize the sea lion and then go disentangle the animal. So they'll remove the entanglement, and then from there they'll put a tracker on it and they'll dye the fur so they can study and make sure that he's going to be okay and tag it. And those and those big things. So there is a lot of resources of going out and helping these marine mammals. So the biggest thing is talking about it. I know this is not what you signed, you thought this was going to end like, was talking about, the sad part, but this is true. This is happening out there. Is a lot of our marine mammals are struggling with interacting with humans. So awareness, outreach, and education, that is what I love to do. That's ultimately why I do what I do, is to get people educated on what's happening out there and excited about the environment, so people will go and do something about it. So there are so many organizations out there, from NOAA to even Pinniped Entanglement Group, Lose the Loop, like all different organizations that you see listed here. But you're thinking like, well, what can I do to help? I don't live in Alaska. I don't do, I don't know what I can do. Biggest thing is cutting the loop. I mean, there's still where you can get cans in those little loop plastics, cutting those, any packaging, food packaging or packaging that you get with loops, take the extra seconds and cut it. Even though you are putting it in the trash, it is likely to end up out in the ocean, especially if you like to go recreational fish. Those are all in those fishing packets, and that's why it's a problem. Go banless, rubber bands. If you have to throw away a rubber band, that is a loop too. Also, maybe if you work for a packaging company, there are solutions that are, that are biodegradable straps. If you never know. But there are solutions out there. But the biggest thing is getting involved and cleaning up, especially when I'm out there, even just on my own, but even with Uncruise, if I see trash, I tell people to pick it up, or like, hey, I'll go pick that up really quick. You know, because I don't want to go out in, you know, we're in pristine Alaska and see trash. It's the worst. It ruins my day, so I go pick it up. So we're always picking up trash, and it's just one less animal that might get stuck in it. You know, well, it's helping a lot of things out. But if we do see an entanglement, one of the things that Uncruise does is we contact people. We take photos, GPS points, and date, and these are the people that we contact if we see entanglement with any animal, not just pinnipeds, any animal. But one of the main things is we need to report is it in distress, and also whether it is whether it's in distress, is it urgent, and we need to make sure that we're not doing anything. Doing self-disentanglement is actually more stressful on animals than anything. So it's better to keep it to the professionals. So we don't ever disentangle ourselves. It's not the good thing to do. That's why we report it and do all these things and send it in. So, and we have done that here with Uncruise. Now, I did promise cute photos and to talk about these amazing cute animals, and I'm not going to end on a sad note. So here is some amazing cute little photos that I've taken throughout the years, and I absolutely love it. Here is a harbor seal nursing. Oh gosh, harbor seal laughing. I just couldn't help myself. The baby sea otter nursing. I was freaking out while this was happening. A female Steller sea lion eating a spotted catfish. That was cool. A sea lion eating a salmon, and generally what they do is they actually will grab a salmon and sling it in the air, and basically, because they can't really chew that well, but this sea lion, another sea lion saw this and was coming after her, so she just had to swallow it. So watching that was a show in itself. And then here's a really cute baby sea otter sleeping, and the mom, her arms around it. I mean, oh, isn't that adorable? And then just a cuddle puddle, you know. A group of otters is called a raft, and yes, they do wrap themselves around kelp and sleep in a group. Just adorable. And yes, sometimes they cover their eyes. It's just how, it hurts. They're so cute. One was sticking his tongue out at me. I mean, they're such funny creatures and cool to look at. All right, and then I'll take any questions that anybody has. And all right, doesn't look like we have any. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've had some fun. Hope you guys enjoyed these cute photos and creatures, and I really hope to see you guys out there with me and out with Uncruise and enjoying not just those big whales and megafauna and all these amazing things, but also these little creatures that like to hang out while you're kayak. All right, thank you guys. It's been fun.